I'm Jen Davis, and this is my KW story.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's My KW Story. We are joined with the fantastic Jen Davis this afternoon, and we're going to go through what is a really awesome story of how she joined Keller Williams, how she was an incredibly successful agent, and ultimately the role that she is in today that many of you are probably aware of. So, Jen, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedule.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
I know, I love fun things, right?
Yes, that's accurate.
So talk to me about how you ended up at Keller Williams. Where were you before? What did your world look like, and how did you get here? When was it?
So I've been at Keller Williams, gosh, it will be 11 years this fall. Ahead of that, I was a buyer's agent at another company. So I didn't start with KW. I was an agent at a competing brokerage for about 5 years before I met Dan Holt. So we were introduced by a mutual friend of ours, and Dan spent about 6 months recruiting me to KW. And I actually said no right up until the time he paid for me to go to a KWU class, Win with Buyers in Kansas City, which is about 3 hours from here. And that really was the tipping point of moving from one brokerage over to Keller Williams.
You know, it's interesting when we hear your story of Dan tried to recruit you for a long time, 6 months or so, if I'm remembering correctly, and then sent you to Win with Buyers, and that was the moment. You know, we refer often to the ignition point, which, by the way, there's a reason the class is called Ignite. We refer to the ignition point where something changes for somebody, whether that's to join Keller Williams or that is a different trajectory in their career and where we see things really begin to escalate. But there's always an ignition point. And in your story, I think Win with Buyers is probably a huge part of that.
It's a huge part of it. You know, it was the clarifying moment of there's an easier way to do this. There's a better way to do this. And I had no access to any of that training ahead of that day. And I thought, oh my gosh, if this is what one day in a class can do, what would it be like to actually be at Keller Williams full time?
So you joined Keller Williams, you joined the Holt Homes Group as a buyer's agent. How many homes did you sell that first year?
So before I joined KW, my biggest year was 16 houses. And then the first full year I had at Keller Williams, I closed 49.
That's a big leap. So clearly the class was very effective.
Yeah, the class was effective. It was also, you know, Dan was the first person that I ever met that didn't look at a buyer agent role as a less than role. So he spent some time with me walking me through what it was, what it looked like to actually have a business plan, right? How many phone calls do I need to make, right? All the good stuff that we learned, calls to contacts, contacts to appointments, signed agreements, all of those things. And so once I had that, honestly, it made everything so simple. It took the guesswork out of what do I need to do next?
So you're a buyer's agent, you do 49 deals. I imagine you're pretty exhausted at that point. Tell us where the rest of your journey in the buyer agent role looks like.
Yeah, so I mean, there was a pretty steady climb. It was exhausting that first year, and Dan and I looked up, and you know, I wanted to do more, and he clearly wanted the team to grow, and so we looked at how would it look to build out the buy side, kind of how you would build out an MREA team, right? Just on the buy side versus focusing on listings. And so I worked really hard over the next 5 to 6 years to structure really one hire a year, right? I went from admin to help with some lead generation to showing support, and then eventually an executive assistant. And I went from 49 units to, I think the last 3 years I was a buyer's agent, we closed 225 units every year within 1 or 2. And it was just that ability to say, okay, we're going to constantly narrow the focus. We talk about that 80-20 rule. And it was, how do I remain in my 20%? And the interesting thing is every year my 20% changed. So, and that changed with whatever hire I needed to make. So if I needed to narrow my focus from one thing to the next, it was, what am I giving up and who do I need to replace myself doing that portion of the job?
You know, you just highlighted out something that's so crucial. We will frequently bring in leverage for our licensed folks, our buyer's agents, our listing agents, our operations folks. We'll bring in TCs under our EAs and DOOs. Same thing in our lead gen departments. And yet we don't always go back through and reset the job description for that person who now has leverage underneath them. And often they can kind of hold some of those things instead of refocusing on the 20%. I think that's a crucial point that you made there, because ultimately that refocusing and the narrowing of your 20% because of the leverage is what allowed you to accomplish huge things.
You know, I think that's right. And it was strategic, right? It was very much, it wasn't that I woke up one day and thought, oh, I need help with showings and I'm going to go and grab a showing agent. It was very much, it was strategic in that I'm overwhelmed with paperwork and systems or lack of systems. So we're going to bring administrative support on. Then it was, I am struggling to keep up with leads because I'm in showing. So we're going to bring lead support in. And then it was, okay, I can only show so many houses and still be a mom and all of the other things. So now I need showing support. And then it was, okay, what comes next, right? And so I think when people leverage something, sometimes they jump to the end, right? I'm going to just leverage showings off. And that really wasn't the case, right? It was, I had to earn, the right with systems and models to have a predictable business. To be able to hire someone else, right? To be able to take on someone else and their goals and dreams and ambitions and all those things.
Now let's fast forward. So you're crushing it at the buyer's agent role. 2019 rolls around. Dan's taking other opportunities. This presents opportunity for you to take on new positions inside of Holt Homes. What happens next?
Yeah. So the beginning of 2019, Dan came to me and said, I would like for you to buy into the team and I'd like for you to run it. And I didn't know the full team, right? I mean, I knew all the people on the team, but I didn't know all the systems and the models and things that we used on the listing side. And I said, clearly, of course, right? Like that's an awesome opportunity. So we valued the business. We determined what my buy-in was going to be, and then what my lead time was going to be on how do I learn this? And, it's interesting looking back on that first 6 months as a co-owner. I spent so much time with our accountant learning a P&L. And understanding it and figuring out what our revenue drivers were. One of the things that I learned during that time is Dan had built a great team. We were, closing 450 to 460 homes per year. And because he built it, he understood why he built it the way that he did. And one of the benefits of having somebody come in later and take a look at those systems is I had the ability to make some adjustments and some improvements over that first 6 months before I really even stepped in as the CEO. So from January to June, really, I learned our systems and our models. I made adjustments and then took over running the team on a day-to-day basis, June of 2019.
So you've taken over now as CEO of Holt Homes Group. Was that an easy transition?
No. Oh gosh, no.
The tone into your voice, you're like, oh, why did you say it?
No, it's a good question. I think that sometimes people look at the numbers or statistics and they're like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. That story is awesome. There was a ton of pain in there. It was a learning curve. People that we had on our team didn't really agree with some of the changes I was making or adjustments I was making and opted out. And so during that, that period of time, you have all the questions of, am I the right person? Should I be doing this? Am I qualified? Right? Like that thought goes through your head of, I may have been a great buyer's agent, yet maybe this isn't my next best step. And one of the things that I found during that time is looking ahead and saying, I know what the vision is. I know where we're going. I can see that path, and being able to chunk it down and just say, this is my next right step. And so during that, really 6 to 9 month mark, I re-recruited our leadership team. I redid their KPAs, I did their life stories, motivational interviews to make sure that that core group of people that I needed to help me lead the team, that they were going to stay and that they were going to buy into me as a leader. And I think one of the pieces of that is sometimes we just assume a job responsibility and we assume that everybody else around us is okay. And while there's an adjustment period for us, there's also an adjustment period for those that were hired under another leader. And we've got to develop those relationships and the trust factor that helps, lead a great team.
That's so true. You're going through your own journey, stepping into this role as CEO, learning all the new things. All of a sudden, the weight is on your shoulders, right? Like you are in charge of making sure these other people are successful. And yet, they don't always necessarily know us or trust us yet or have buy-in to us while we've got to make hard decisions. It's very much the balancing act of being the leader the business needs and being the employee, the job owner, right, of your existing role that you need.
It is. And, when you're learning something, you ask so many questions. And sometimes when you ask questions, people think that you doubt them or don't think that maybe they're qualified for something, when in all reality, you're just trying to learn. And one of the adjustments that we made, when I moved over into the CEO role, we were running at about 25% profitable. And one of the things that Dan had tasked me with was, how do we get to 40% profitable, which was the digging in of all the numbers with the P&L and talking with the accountant once a week and doing all those things. So as I'm trying to gain trust with everyone, I'm also making adjustments on how we spend money, what we spend it on, I asked different questions than Dan had asked in the past. And so there was also all of those other things going on where I was tasked with something by Dan, and that wasn't necessarily communicated with the rest of the team, looking back maybe as well as we could have.
So 2019, you take over as CEO. We charged through a very rough 2020 as an industry. You're a fresh CEO in the role. You get your feet under you, you're moving forward, team is being successful. Because you have built a big business and run things correctly and you have done the development, in early to mid 2022, a new opportunity comes available. So talk to us about what happens next in Jen Davis's world.
So, I'm running the team and it's awesome, right? I'm running it with good friends of mine. I've got great agents and everything is clicking along. We've come off of 2 of the best years that we've ever had. And I get a call from our mutual friend, Sajik Patel, and he says, "Hey, have you ever thought of being the vice president of MAPS coaching?" And I laughed and I said, "No."
I can absolutely see you laughing at Sajik, being like, did you call the right person?
Are you pranking me right now? And so, once somebody says something like that, though, it's very challenging to let it go. And so I was leaving to go on spring break, I think, with my kids. And it was the only really thing I think I thought of for that whole week was, is this going to be my next right step?
That's awesome. Thank you, Sajik, for ruining your spring break. We're very happy that he did. So talk to us now. You're the vice president of MAPS Coaching, which again, you came into a very large organization with a lot of coaches, right? You didn't start that from the ground up. You stepped into it, and that comes with its own challenges. She has to deal with me.
It's that part's fun. I think the number of coaches that we have, it's interesting because everyone has their own perspective, right? And all of the perspectives are accurate. It's just a matter of saying, okay, what can I gain from these perspectives? And how do we make sure that we're all running the same direction, right? How do we all make sure that we're running and growing MAPS, growing our coaches and growing our clients? And so I've been in role, I think, since June of last year. So, 9 or 10 months at this point. And it's fun. I mean, you're in it with me. We meet once a week, and it's just that I don't know that I knew how vast it was stepping into the role. And every day I'm like, oh, now I get that part of it, right? It's that I'm still in the learning phase. I'm still in the unpacking and asking questions and starting to gain some traction of, okay, I can see our next right step for the mission and vision that we have.
I think it's so cool when we look at your story, right? That ignition point of Win with Sellers, you join Dan's team, you start crushing it as a buyer's agent, you refocus yourself to become a lead buyer's agent, to eventually become a leader in the organization, to become the CEO, to move now into a KWRI role as the vice president of one of the largest coaching companies that are out there, and very successful and very well respected in that role. And we all appreciate you there. So if you had to give the moral of the story, right, the thing you want people to take from your journey, what would that be? What's the learning lesson out there?
You know, I actually heard Mark King say it one time, and he said, you're always remember that everywhere you show up, you're interviewing for your next opportunity. And I think the thing that I've done over the course of my career is I have been very focused on the task at hand. So I don't chase a shiny object. I do look to get to mastery in whatever role I'm in. So when I was a buyer's agent, I wasn't necessarily looking ahead to lead the company, yet I showed up as a leader every day. And when I was leading Holt Homes Group, I wasn't looking for the opportunity at KW, yet it showed up because I showed up. And I think if I were to give anybody advice and you're looking at an opportunity roadmap and you're like, gosh, I want to get here, whatever here is to you, right? If it's 50 units, if it's 5,000 units, if it's an opportunity within KW, it would be nail what you're doing right now. I wasn't looking around or looking ahead because I was so focused on earning the space I was already in. I'm very grateful for each opportunity while I'm in it. And I think that's the difference sometimes in how I show up is I do understand the gravity of the roles that I'm put in and the excitement of them. And so wherever you're at in your journey, right, wherever that may be, own the space you're in right now. Other opportunities will come up. They just do. I was on a call with Jay and Wendy a couple of weeks ago around the one thing, and we were talking about this idea of mastery, right? And people recognize you when you're on the journey to mastery, right? I think April on Jay's team said game sees game, right? Like you recognize somebody else that's on that path. That's a path that's very genuine, right? It's very authentic. If you wake up every day and think, I'm going to be the best version of myself and I'm going to do the right things, other opportunities always come up.
That's awesome. Thank you for the insight on there. And I love the point about the one thing conversation with Jay and Wendy Papazan of game sees game. It's true. Like people appreciate the hustle. When you are mastering something, it's noticeable to those around you. All right, we're going to wrap with the fun fact about Jen, and then we will say goodbye to you for our interview. So what's one random fact about Jen Davis?
I think the random fact would be I grew up in a really small town. So both of my parents grew up in New York. My dad decided to go to law school at Kansas University. And then they ended up in a town of 800 people. So I graduated with 24 people in my graduating class after my parents had moved from New York to Kansas to Nebraska. So grew up in a really small town, and it's just funny to look back and see, all the different changes, all the places I get to go now, and just a pretty cool growing up story.
I think more than 24 people fit in a subway car, and that was your graduating class.
I think I can still remember every person in my graduating class's birthday because I started with them in kindergarten. No one moved in or out of the town ever.
Wow, that's impressive. I love it.
Yeah.
Proof that you can go anywhere, no matter where you are from or how small of a town or if there's no stoplights in it. Jen, I appreciate your time so much today, and I know our viewers of this video got a ton out of it, so thank you so much for being here. If anybody needs to reach you, how do they do that? Where can they find you?
I'm pretty available. I mean, honestly, shoot me a private message through Facebook or Instagram, send me an email. My email is jen.davis@kw.com.
All right, thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and we will see you on the next My KW story.